So we started this class out with just a color mixing, and for this one, the sky peeking through the clouds is the cerulean blue, and then when you start getting into the shadowy areas, you touch in the French ultramarine, and then it's a sort of dark purple that goes under there. So I mixed the magenta with some of the quinacridone gold, and then pulled the French ultramarine over into it to get that dark purple that's at the bottom of the cloud. So if it's too dark, just add a little bit more of the French ultramarine and blue it even more. It'll soften it a little bit. You don't want it to be too dark and ominous. And next we start mixing up the warmer purple that is towards the horizon, where the sun is bouncing off the water and it warms up the clouds a bit down there. So that one's another mix of purple and quinacridone gold, and then this time I bring in the cerulean blue, and you get that sort of warm gray that goes at the bottom of the clouds. So if it's looking a little too maroonish, like mine, just keep adding a bit more yellow into it. And it'll brown it a little bit more. So now we're going to practice the dry scraping for the sea. And so you need to get all the water out of the base of the brush. And so I just roll it across my paper towel to get that water out of there. And then I can go into the paint and just scrape across with the sides of the hairs to get that dry brush look. And that will give us those pretty sparkles on the water. And the colors for the ocean will be just a mixture of greens and purples, and also just some straight cerulean. So uh, it'll go from the darker purples and greens in the foreground, and then go to the lighter cerulean color as it goes away to give it a sense of distance. So it's a bit warmer and darker in the foreground and lighter and cooler far away. So just a little more practice and then we will go to the real thing. So I'm on a quarter sheet taped down, and I'm going to get the first, or the top 2/3 of the paper wet, and we'll do the clouds all wet into wet. So also have a spray bottle handy in case your paper starts to dry on you. But I got mine wet enough that I didn't need to use it. So once those top 2/3 are nice and wet, then I'll come in with just the cerulean and start coming in diagonal shapes and floating in these sort of fluffy clouds by making sort of circular motions with the brush, or half circle motions. And then keep those white gaps in between, so don't get too close. have those nice big openings on the top because that's where the sun's bursting through, and then they'll get a little closer together as you come down. Also, I'm flat right now. I'm not on any angle. If you're on an angle, then everything will fall down. So you want to be flat so that your clouds stay in place. So now I've got things starting to connect a bit more down at the bottom. That makes everything look far away, like it's going off into the distance. Now I've got the French ultramarine, and I go to the underside of the cerulean. I'll leave those top ones just cerulean and start building the shadows as I go down. So now I'm going to switch to those even darker purples and hit just underneath the French ultramarine. And getting these good darks will give you that high contrast, so it'll really make it look like the light's bursting through. If you don't have enough contrast, it won't be bright enough light. You can keep charging your clouds as you go by dashing in more darks. It tends to lighten a lot as it dries, especially since we're starting with water already. And then now you got to mix up that warmer gray that goes at the very bottom. So here it looks a little too much on the green side, so I got to add more magenta and soften it a little bit. And then as it dries and the pigments separate a little bit, you'll get that really pretty golden glow that comes through. And then I'll just come and flatten out and soften that bottom edge. With just a damp brush. And then while everything's still wet, I'm going to just lightly wipe my damp brush through the clouds and get those pretty little sunbeams flaring through the clouds. But don't take away too much paint. And you don't want hard edges in there. So try to keep it kind of soft and light. So now for the water, I'm going to start scraping the paint across. And I start at the bottom and work my way up so that I get rid of the water in my brush as I go up the page. And I'm just gently scraping across the surface of the paper to get that dry brush look. If you have too much water, you press down too hard, you won't get those sparkles. And then I'm also deliberately leaving the opening in the center because that's where the sun's coming through and blasting the water. It's also going to give emphasis to my subject. So I'm going to try to just sort of build up around the edges and the bottom, and especially darker towards the bottom to make sure I have that sense of distance in there. So those were all kind of neutral colors, and now I'm trying to get some more of the blues and greens into there. So I got some nice greens in there, but I tried to go back and add a little bit more of that cerulean blue. And then after this stage, I'm going to go ahead and stop and make sure I'm completely dry. But build up enough water in your foreground first. Right, so that feels like about enough. I don't want to add too much. And then I will dry all the way and then start with the boat. And I haven't drawn anything. I'm going to just pull down that mast. I'm using my pinky to help guide my line to keep it straight and just barely touching the paper so that it breaks up a little bit and keeps it from being too heavy of a line. So I've got that right in my focal point. And now I'll just put the boat on. And for the color for the boat, I just took the French ultramarine and the magenta and a touch of the yellow with pretty much no water to get that really dark. And then uh, for the reflection underneath, all I did was with a damp brush pull some of that color down. And now we can put the sail. And the sail is also gray. Everything, since it's so far away and the sun's hitting us from behind, is all going to appear gray, even though it's really white. So got this a lighter shade of gray. It's not as dark as the mast or the top of the boat. And I'm also going to add a little bit of shading into there so that it looks like it's getting blown in the wind a bit. And that's about it. Blend stuff in, soften your edges.